And this tefillah, for him, it was an eight tzara. He was feeling distressed that he couldn't find the key to take care of his Rebbe's needs, which was his custom every single day. And from that distress came such tremendous kavanah that his tefillah transformed his reality. And the key surfaced in his pocket where it had not been before. And he found out afterwards the key actually had been in somebody else's possession, and somehow, miraculously, it ended up in his pocket. Now, this story is told over by Hasidim, and it is definitely understood literally by them. But it also has, like many stories in Hasidus, are true on more than one level. It's true on the literal level, but it also has metaphorical truth. A key is very symbolic, right? A key opens up new worlds. So the fact that it's dafka, a key that he was looking for, and that through his tefillah, with such kavanah, he was able to find the key in his pocket, it means a new possibilities opened up before him. That tefillah has the power to transform and to take us to places where new possibilities open up before us. Rabbi Yehuda Halevi in the Kuzari deals with this. He talks about the king in the Kuzari. I don't know if you know the structure of the Kuzari. There's a Melech HaKuzarim who is sort of a fictional character based on truth, based on real history. There was a king of the Khazars who converted to Judaism in the early Middle Ages. And Rabbi Yehuda Halevi took that story and he used it to frame his own work of philosophy. He puts questions in the mouth of the king, and then he has this Jewish philosopher who answers the king's questions. And that's how he puts forth his own Jewish philosophy. It just makes for more interesting reading. So the king asks him, what's the point of davening? If everything is decreed on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, everything is already signed, sealed, and delivered, why do people need to daven? And he answers, davening changes us. If we really daven the way we're supposed to, we emerge from tefillah not the same person as we were when we started. And that's how we can change the gzeirah. Even that which was signed, sealed, and delivered, because that gzeirah was issued for the person we were then. But it can change, it can be modified if we change ourselves. And one of the ways that we can change ourselves is through tefillah. So now we're going to go back to the mitzvah of tefillah. And I have on the sheet some of the sources. There is a source sheet in your booklet. Some of the sources that Zamira was alluding to we'll see inside. We won't belabor them too much because she did explain them, but we'll just review. The Rambam, as Samira explained in Hilchot Tefillah, mitzvat aseh lehitpalel b'chol yom. This is in the Yad HaChazakah. He says the same thing in Sefer HaMitzvot. It is a mitzvah deoraita. It's numbered among the 613 mitzvot deoraita that we have to daven every single day. There is an aspect of tefillah that is derabanan, and that is, he says, ein minyan hatfilot min haTorah, the last line, ein mishne hatfilah hazot min haTorah, ve'ein la tefillah zman kavua min haTorah. The number of tefillot, the text of tefillah, and the time of tefillah are all derabanan. But the idea that we have to turn to Hashem in prayer every single day, that's a mitzvah deoraita. It's a mitzvah min haTorah. Where is it learned from? The pasuk that we say every day in Kriyat Shema, ve'avadetem et Hashem Elokeichem. We have to serve Hashem b'chol levavchem. And Chazal learned what's avodah shebalev, service of the heart, zohi tefillah. It's a statement in Chazal, so the Rambam says, well, if avodah shebalev is tefillah, and the Torah says, ve'avadetem et Hashem b'chol levavchem, then it's a mitzvah deoraita to serve Hashem with some kind of heartfelt tefillah, some kind of heartfelt, again, as you were saying, sometimes it's difficult to be so boxed in with the time of tefillah or the specific text that we have of tefillah, that it is still a mitzvah midrabanan to do that every day, and we'll come back to how we can do that if we don't feel sort of moved within ourselves to do it. But according to the Rambam, very minimally, if you at least want to get the mitzvah d'oraita, say anything. Turn to God and say what's on your mind. No fixed text, no set time, no number of tefillot. Just turn to Hashem once a day and say something. That's not so hard. Okay, we'll see. That's the Rambam. The Ramban says, I disagree. He cites it in the beginning. The Ramban has hasagot, sort of notes on the Rambam's Sefer HaMitzvot. In most cases, he agrees with the Rambam's count of what the 613 mitzvot de'oraita are. That's based on a Gemara, by the way. There's a Gemara, Rav Simlai taught that there are taryag mitzvot de'oraita. There are 613 mitzvot. He told us that there are 613, but he doesn't enumerate them in the Gemara. So later on, the Rishonim tried to figure out what are exactly the 613 to which he is referring. So the Rambam counts tefillah every day as one of them. The Ramban says no. Tefillah every day is not one of the 613 mitzvot de'oraita. Not that it's not a mitzvah, because again, it is a mitzvah d'Rabbanan, but it's not de'oraita. And he brings several proofs for this that show that they're technical halachic proofs that show that Chazal in several other places seem to indicate that tefillah is exclusively a mitzvah d'Rabbanan. And he says, rather than looking at it as a mitzvah de'oraita, ella vadai, I'm on the first line in source number 2, vadai kol inyan hatfilah eino chova klal. It's not an obligation. Aval hu mimidot chesed habore yitbarach aleinu sheshomea ve'oneh bechol kor'enu elav. This is a beautiful concept. It's not an obligation. When people say, and how often do we hear this, right, from our husbands, especially when the baby starts crying, or it's like crazy hour, all the kids have homework, and you just walked in from your own job. I have to go daven, right? I have to. And we say it ourselves. I have to go daven now. But the Ramban is saying, no, don't say I have to go daven now. It's a chesed habore. This is an incredible chesed that HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us free access to him at all times, that we can approach Melech Malchei HaMlachim, who is Shomea Tfilah. He will hear us and answer us, respond to us in some way. He hears everything we say at any time. Can you imagine having free access to the President of the United States, to the King of England? It's still weird to say that, right? The King of England. You can pick up the phone and call King Charles at any time and tell him what's on your mind? Unheard of. We have that access to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at all times. It's like the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. We can use it at any time. Just, play the card, call out to Hashem, and he hears us. B'chol karenu elav. That's an amazing chesed, and that should be how we approach tefillah, says the Ramban. It's not an obligation to call out to Hashem every day. It's a privilege to be able to call out to Hashem every day. Okay, so is there no mitzvah to daven at all? So the Ramban says, well, there is an aspect of tefillah that's a mitzvah, as the Mira said, and that is to call out to Hashem be'et tzara, not based on the pasuk u'la'avdo b'chol levavchem. La'avdo b'chol levavchem is, says the Ramban, a broad category. It's a directive. It's not a specific mitzvah. It's a broad directive telling us that when we serve Hashem through tefillah, through learning Torah, through any service that we do of Hashem, it should be b'chol levavchem. It should be with all of our hearts. It should be sincere and, motivated, coming from a genuine place of feeling. It's not specific to tefillah. What's specific to tefillah is the sources that you have in source number 3, the psukim that Zamira quoted, V'chi tavo'u milchama be'artzachem al hatzar hatzorer etchem v'hareotem b'chatzotzrot. Blow the sound of the truah. The sound of the truah is the tut-tut-tut-tut-tut-tut-tut-tut. Right? It's the sound of crying. It's supposed to evoke the sound of crying. So and that's our tefillah. It accompanied the giving of the korbanot. These are sounds, the blowing of the shofar was not exclusive to Rosh Hashanah when the Beit HaMikdash stood. The shofar was blown along with chatzotzrot, the long silver trumpets, which you can see sometimes they have, when they have tekes at the kotel, sometimes they blow the chatzotzrot. They have chatzotzrot already made, ready and waiting for when Mashiach arrives at any moment, and that would accompany the giving of the korbanot and the tefillot in the Beit HaMikdash. So if there comes upon us a war in our land, or any kind of tsar hatzorer, and it could be an enemy, it could be any kind of tsara, any kind of suffering that we're experiencing, we have a mitzvah to blow the chatzotzrot, and says the Ramban, that translates into a mitzvah to turn to Hashem in tefillah b'chol eit tsara, whenever there is a tsara. Okay. Rav Soloveitchik, so I actually quoted from a different source. Rav Soloveitchik spoke about this many times. It's not just in one place that he spoke about this machloket between the Ramban and the Rambam, and trying to show that the Rambam would have come back. The Rambam lived before the Ramban. Maimonides lived. They might have overlapped by a couple of years, but the Ramban would have been an infant. So that's. So by the time the Ramban was writing about tefillah and his notes on the Rambam was no longer alive. So Rav Soloveitchik is kind of, if the Rambam could have come back and said, Rav Soloveitchik also spoke so many times. Since I have extra time, because the person after me, I'll just indulge in all these little side stories. The Rav Soloveitchik wrote and spoke. I think you can see videos on YouTube, but he certainly wrote in many places about how for him, he never felt alone, and the study of Torah, he always, he said, actually he spoke about it in terms of how he got through there was a very difficult year, he lost his wife, and he had a very hard time recovering from that, and he says, Lule Torat Chasha Shuai, if not for the study of Torah, azavadati be'anye, I would have become lost in my depression at that time. But the study of Torah helped me not feel alone, because when I opened my Sefer and I started learning the Gemara, all of a sudden Rava walks through the door, and Abaye walks through the door, and then the Rambam walks through the door, and he felt that he was accompanied by these neshamos. They were alive for him. So when he says the Rambam sort of responded to the Ramban, they were there for him. This was a real conversation for him. It was an ongoing conversation. It didn't end when the person himself, when the body departed this world. The neshama remained there for the Rav. So he says the Rambam, there's really no machloket, because the Rambam comes back and says to the Ramban, of course tefillah be'et tzara is a mitzvah da'oraita. But in this source that I brought, which is the Rishimos on the Gemara, so in the Gemara, the Rav brings a statement in the Gemara that sounds very strong and somewhat shocking at first glance. The Gemara that he cites, the beginning of source number 4, Ve'amar Rava bar Chinana Saba mishmei de Rav, Kol she'efshar lo levakesh rachamim al chaveiro ve'eno mevakesh nikra chote. Wow, right? It's extremely strong language. Anybody who has the opportunity to daven on behalf of someone else and doesn't take that opportunity is called a chote. He's a sinner. So in trying to explain this very strong language, we could say, it's a very positive value to daven on behalf of someone else, but to say that, if you don't daven on someone else's behalf, if you have the opportunity to do so, you're a sinner, that's very strong. So says the Rav, he brings the Shitat HaRambam, there's a mitzvah to daven b'chol yom. On the other hand, the Ramban says only tefillah be'et tzara. The underlined line at the beginning of the second paragraph, the Ramban, he says, Nir'ah de'af l'shitat HaRambam yesh mitzvah miyuchedet lehitpalel be'et tzara. Even according to the Rambam, there is a mitzvah, not just a chesed, but it's a mitzvah, to daven be'et tzara, as the Rambam says. And the Rambam also quotes the same pasuk that the Ramban quoted about Atzar hatzorer etchem, that in the time of tzara, we turn to Hashem with tru'ah, with that crying sound of the chatzotzrot. And the Rambam develops this idea in Hilchot Ta'anit, that when there's a mitzvah to daven and to fast when bad things happen to us. He says this is all part of the process of tshuva, of returning to Hashem. That when something bad happens to us, we have to say to ourselves, I don't know why this is happening, but clearly it's happening for a reason. Hashem is trying to send us a message. And therefore we turn to Hashem and we say, I want to try to fix whatever's wrong. I want to draw closer to you, Hashem. so that this sorrow will go away. And says the Rambam, V'im eino mitpalel. I'm on the underlined line at the end of that longer paragraph. Davar ze midarchei hatshuvahu. V'im eino mitpalel, and onto the top of page 2. Be'et tzara. If we don't daven, if we miss that opportunity, like the Gemara says, if we have an opportunity and we don't take it, harei ze chisaron be'emunah b'Hashem. This shows that there is a flaw in our emunah in Hashem. Dehevei ke'omer shehakol mikre. It's equivalent to saying it's just a coincidence. If I daven, so turn it around. If I do daven, what am I saying? Hashem, I know this came from you, and I believe that you are mechadesh the world every single day, in every moment. Existence is continually being willed by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Ramban actually says, earlier in Parashat Bereshit, where he talks about the idea of Vayar et asher asa kitov, and Hashem saw that which he had made, and he saw that it's good. What does it mean that Hashem sees that it's good? It wasn't a science experiment. How is this going to turn out? Oh, it came out great. The Vayar kitov means that Hashem is continually willing. It's a kiyum. It's the kitov is the kiyum, that Hashem is continually willing the world to exist. And if Hashem were to divert his attention for even an instant, Chalila, the world could fall apart. Therefore, when we daven, we're expressing our belief in that concept. Because we're saying, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, you are willing everything to happen. At every moment, you are willing things into existence. And therefore, if I daven to you, you can change what's happening. You can bring about change. That's emunah. And says the Rambam, if we don't daven and we don't turn to Hashem with that idea that I believe that this reality can change because you're making it happen every moment, then there's something wrong with our emunah. He says, Misha eino bitpalel be'et tzara, the underlined lines at the end of that paragraph, somebody who does not daven at a time of suffering, it's as if you're saying, I'm walking with Hashem, and it's all just a series of coincidences. It's like expressing the opinion that everything is just left to nature, to coincidence, nature with a lowercase, and it can't be changed, even through tefillah. So something's wrong with his belief in Hashem's supervision, constant supervision of the world. And that's why he's called a chotei. The Gemara says, if you have the opportunity to daven on behalf of someone who's suffering and you don't do it, wow, that's sinful. Because that's equivalent to saying, oh, there's nothing I can do. That's the reality. I give up. I surrender to the forces of nature, as opposed to saying, somebody's sick, I'll daven to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the same HaKadosh Baruch Hu who made him sick, can make him well. Like Rabbi Chanina said, right? Remember the story, Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, when his daughter put vinegar into the Shabbos candles rather than oil, and he says, well, so what are you upset about? The same God who makes oil burn can make vinegar burn. The properties, nature can change. We just have to have faith. We just have to have emunah. And this is such a tremendous principle. There's a very interesting tshuva. Rabbi Yitzchak Zilberstein Shlita, the brother-in-law of Rav Chaim Kanievsky Zatzal, was asked this question, L'hitpalel al choleh o lomar psukei de zimra. He was asked a question. A person came late to shul, and he knows that at the end of davening in this particular shul, they're going to say Tehillim for a person who's sick. So he says, should I skip Psukei de Zimra and just daven with the tzibur from wherever they're up to so that I could say Tehillim at the end? Or should I say Psukei de Zimra quietly to myself? And then at the end, I probably won't have time to say Tehillim along with them because I have to get to work. And Rav Zilberstein said, no. Psukei de Zimra, it doesn't say anywhere in halachic literature that if you don't say Psukei de Zimra, you're a chotei. right? Which is probably a good thing for most of us on some days. If you, it's a good thing to say Psukei D'Zimra because it raises our awareness of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as the Borei Olam. It brings us to the point of a more meaningful Shmona Esrei, hopefully. That's the goal of Psukei D'Zimra, is to get us into the right frame of mind so that when we get to Kriyat Shema, we get to Shmona Esrei, we have a better understanding of what we're saying. But we're not sinning if we woke up late and we have to get to work and you have to skip a little bit in order to get to the important parts and we don't say the full Psukei D'Zimra. But the Gemara does say that if you have the opportunity to daven for a chola and you don't, then you're a chote. So he says, by all means, skip Psukei D'Zimra and say Tehillim at the end for the chola. And then at the end, he adds something remarkable. It's not so, it sounds like, yeah, obviously, but if you think about it, it's really remarkable. He says, "Dekol shekain, im mitpalel ve'omer tehilim avur chole, shemekayem baze mitzvat aseh shel ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." He says, there's another dimension here. Sure, you're getting closer to the Borei Olam. When we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu be'et tzara, we are bringing ourselves closer into a relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when we daven on behalf of someone else, there's also a dimension of Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. We are creating connection not just with the Borei Olam, but also with one another. And this is a natural, I think we're seeing this so vividly today in our matzav, that as we strengthen the bond with one, the bond with the other becomes stronger as well. Whether we're turning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in tefillah first, and then that extends to his children, and we walk out in a more positive frame of mind, and we greet someone with a smile, and we build connection because of the frame of mind that we've established, because we've strengthened our connection with the one above, we're able to bring that connection down and share it with the people around us. Or it can work the other way, that because we feel connected to one another, that translates into a more positive relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. When we strengthen the bond with one, the other becomes strengthened as well. And then when we daven on behalf of someone else, we have both of these dimensions working together, strengthening the chibur, the connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, expressing our emunah in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that he is mechadesh betuvo b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh b'reishit. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is constantly renewing the creation of the world, and things can change, things can get better. And we also work on our V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. We demonstrate caring and love for one another. Actually, my Rav in Beit Shemesh spoke about this at some point, during these difficult days, and he said that he's also he's involved in an organization. He's one of the founders of an organization called Salash, Tzava L'Shem Shamayim, and they bring religious articles to army bases around the country. And he's been traveling, as you can imagine, a lot, and bringing Sfarim, Tzitziot, Tefillin, all over the country. And he says, you can't imagine the soldiers running to come get these religious articles, not just the Datiyim. Baruch Hashem, most of them have their tefillin with them. It's the ones who don't have, who want so badly, talit, tefillin. Why are we feeling this? So obviously there's some element of there's no such thing as an atheist in a foxhole, which we'll talk about a little bit. But it's also because of this biyachad that we're feeling, the connectedness that we feel with one another. When we feel connected to someone, we feel connected to their families as well. Right? When we see a friend we haven't seen in a while, how are your parents doing? How are your kids doing? And that's what we're seeing here, is that relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu and the relationship with Klal Yisrael is because we're all connected. Because when we feel connected to one another, we say, how's your father, our Father in heaven? How's he doing through all of this? How's the Shechinta Begaluta? HaKadosh Baruch Hu is also Kivyachol suffering when we're suffering. And we bring him into the picture. When we turn to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we say, think of your children. How are your children doing? We're all connected. So tefillah on behalf of someone else is so powerful because it has both of these dimensions of bringing us closer to Hashem and V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, bringing us closer to one another. So ultimately, biyachad nenatzeach. Tefillah be'et tzara. Rav Pinkus, in his famous sefer on tefillah, She'arim b'tefillah, says this is actually one of the most fundamental aspects of tefillah, whether it's the essential mitzvah of tefillah or not, he doesn't get into that. But it's philosophically, it is the underpinning of all tefillah. And he talks about this in Sha'arim B'Tfilah. Rav Pinkus goes through all different, the 10 lashonot of tefillah that Chazal identify. There are different terms in Tanakh that are used to indicate tefillah. And here he talks about bitzur, batzarli ekra Hashem, at a time, tefillah be'et sarah. And he says, bitzur hu akriya be'et sarah, shehu yesod v'ikar l'chol sugyot ha-tefillah. In source number 6. This kind of tefillah, turning to Hashem in a time of suffering, in a time of pain, is the underpinning of all types of tefillah. Kein matzanu b'chazal, shestam tefillah nikreit bakashat rachamim. When Chazal talk about tefillah in a vague way, and they just say tefillah without refining the terminology so that it's more specific, we understand it as a bakashat rachamim, that we're asking for mercy from Hashem. And halacha, every tefillah has to include some kind of bakashat rachamim, ke'ani ha'mevakesh al machsoro, like a poor person who is asking for something because of his need, his lack of something. And this is the teaching of the Rav that Samira spoke about earlier, the idea that we are constantly in a state of need, and we appreciate this. The fact that Hashem created us with needs is a gift. So when we say borei nefashot, what do we say? After we eat and we feel satisfied, we feel good. Borei nefashot rabot v'chesronan. We thank Hashem for creating us with needs, because it's our needs that prompt us to turn to Him. And that's a chesed, that we have needs, and therefore we turn to Hashem and we connect to our Creator. So says Rav Pinkus, and Rav Pinkus points out that's what distinguishes us from everything else in creation. This is unique to man. This ability to perceive our own needs, to recognize our own needs, and to feel that desire to use those needs as a vehicle through which to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No other creature on earth can do that. An animal feels, if it even can identify a feeling as hunger, immediately satiates its need by looking around and finds something in its environment to take care of that need. Only human beings have to think about it. Right? What am I going to eat? I'm going to prepare the food. And we have the ability to recognize that we feel a need, think about how to fulfill that need, and recognize that both the need and the means to its fulfillment come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that is a gift. That's like the Ramban said, tefillah is a chesed. That it's a chesed haborei, that Hashem wants us to connect to Him. When we use the metaphor of calling the king or calling the president, but even if we think about it on a somewhat lower level, like someone's the president of a company, a CEO, and his calls all go through his secretary. But who has the right to get through without going through the secretary? Or he tells the secretary, if this call comes through, put it through without questions. His family, his children, maybe, his wife, maybe it's a way of filtering her calls, we don't know. But his children have access. Why? Because he always wants to hear from his children, right? A parent always wants to hear from a child. Even if it's mundane, but you always want that connection from your child. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is our parent, and He wants us to pick up the phone and call Him and connect to Him. He wants that kesher with us. So we have to respond. We have to not respond. Ideally, we should approach Hashem. However, we don't always approach Hashem. We don't always remember to approach Hashem. And certainly if you hold like the Ramban, that mitzvah, that davening every day is not necessarily mitzvah deoraita, then maybe we don't take the opportunity to connect. In which case, unfortunately, Hashem has to wake us up. And He has to remind us that He wants to hear from us. And sometimes He does that in ways that feel painful to us. But Rav Dessler explains in Michtav Me'Eliyahu in source number 7, Ein nachon lachshov sheHakadosh Baruch Hu mevi yisurim mipnei sheyesh tzorech ba'yisurim atzmam. We shouldn't think that Hashem makes us suffer because there's something in the suffering. The suffering is somehow inherently good for us. and that tefillah is just to get us out of that matzav. Tachlit hayisurim tefillah. He says that the purpose of the suffering is to bring us to the point of tefillah. It's to create that chisaron, that sense, that recognition that something is missing in our lives. When things are good, we don't necessarily notice they're good. There's that famous story of like pennies coming down. Somebody's walking down below the Empire State Building, and pennies keep falling from the sky, and he just walks right by them, and all of a sudden, a pebble hits him in the head, and then he starts, God, what are you doing? Why did you send a pebble? And he's like, and God says, well, I was sending pennies all along, but you didn't pick them up. You ignored them. It's only when the pebble hit you, that's when you looked up. So, unfortunately, sometimes, we forget to look up. He says, Omrim bivirkat gvurat geshamim. In Shmona Esrei, we say, Melech memit umechayeh umatzmiach Yeshua. What comes first? Memit umechayeh. First, you take away, you put to death, and then mechayeh, bring back to life. And from that, matzmiach Yeshua. And the word matzmiach here, from the root semach, is not accidental, it's not coincidental, it's very carefully chosen. How does a plant grow? It bursts forth from a seed. It destroys the seed, right? But first there's a seed, and then at a certain stage, it looks like this is the destruction. And then from the destruction, a plant begins to grow. That's why we talk about Mashiach as tzemach, it's tzemach David, because there is this period that we go through of pain, of suffering, of apparent destruction, and that brings forth Yeshua. Hatzara atzma hi tzmichat ha-Yeshua. The pain that we go through, it's like the pains of childbirth. Right? The Chachamim talk about chevlei Mashiach, like chevlei leida. It's birth pangs. And it gives rise to something very new and very, very beautiful. There's, I was talking to somebody earlier about the videos that we've been watching. Whether you watch the videos of the horrors as the hostages are putting up videos of testimony and things of the horrors of what happened on the 7th of October. I'm not saying, whatever, that's a personal choice to watch or not to watch, but for those who are watching, it's very important to balance them with, there are also a lot of videos of miracles that took place. And there's one video, I think it's only in Hebrew. I haven't heard the story retold. A lot of them, the stories are retold in English and then have been told already in many sources, and I hope that you've heard them, and that over Hanukkah was really a special time to share stories of the miraculous. But there's one that I've only seen in Hebrew, where there was a woman, and she doesn't specify which kibbutz that she was from, but it's from a kibbutz that was completely destroyed, and you can see in the video, her house is the only house standing, and all the houses around hers have been destroyed. And she describes what happened to her on that day. She says, I heard the mechablim, and I was texting with my neighbor, and they were telling, I heard the shooting, and the sirens overhead, and the planes overhead, and I grabbed the one sefer, she didn't look like she had very many svarim on her shelf, and I had a sefer has Zohar, and I took the Zohar with me, and I didn't go into my mamad because I was already hearing from my neighbors that the mamad wasn't safe, that it was being penetrated, and you're backed into a corner. So I went into a closet, and I closed the door, and I got under the clothes in the closet, and I opened the Sefer HaZohar, and I started to read, and I focused so intently on the words. She said, I could see there was light radiating from the letters. The letters were like coming up from the page, and they were filled with light, and I started talking to Rabbi Shimon, in your zechut may I be saved, and then I turned, and I started talking to the Borei Olam, and she says, Borei Olam, I'm in your hands. You do whatever you see fit with me. But please just let me use this sefer to come closer to you. That let me have this time in order to be brought closer to you. And she said the mechablim came into the room where she was, and somebody from the window, they threw a rimon into the room where she was, and they show in the video the closet was untouched. They were shooting all around the room, nothing. They opened the closet, didn't see her. She was under the closet, and and her house was the only house standing in the whole thing. And she said, it's only in the merit of the fact that I turned to Hashem and I said to him, Borei Olam, do with me what you will, but let me be brought closer to you. I want to להתחבר אליך, to become, to chibur, to connect with you. That's tefillah be'et tzara. Using her own words, I don't know if this woman ever davened in her life. She had a Sefer HaZohar. She knew about Rabbi Shimon and that Rabbi Shimon can effect miracles and anything to draw closer to Hashem in that moment. And as we said in the opening words, tefillah be'et tzara, and like there's no atheist, such thing as an atheist in a foxhole, right? That's when you turn to Hashem, because she said, there's nothing else. Nothing else could save me. There is nothing and no one else. It's only me and the Ribbono Shel Olam. And if we can get into that, use that as inspiration, and I can't say, we shouldn't be in that matzav ever, chalila, but to be inspired by that matzav, to get into a headspace of it's me and the Ribbono Shel Olam, and only He makes things happen. L'tov u'lera, that can change our reality, and not only ours, but everyone around us. For many people, tzara is a motivator to daven. Right? And when we be'et tzara, what do? Pull out a Sefer Tehillim. But for other people, it can be very overwhelming. And it can be hard to daven at a time when the tzara is so very intense. It's paralyzing in a certain way. Like, I'm stuck. So what do? So says Rav Dessler in source number 8, V'chein yidaktek l'kayem mitzvat tefillah. Nevertheless, that's when we should feel, I have to daven. When we don't feel, I want to, I feel privileged, what is zchut? It's a chesed habore, then it's a mitzvah. I have to. Why? Gam im adayin mitpalel b'li kavana. He says, even if you're davening and you can't focus on the words, your head is flying everywhere, right? My son, my friend's son, it's too much. Kevan shehatfilah hi bitui ha'emunah b'hakadosh baruch hu. But because tefillah is an expression of emunah, even though it's a purely external avoda, it's not avodas shebalev at that moment. It's just an external. I'm just saying the words. I'm mouthing the words that other people wrote for me. We're still expressing emunah, and that's when it goes from the outside in. Those words will start to work on us. And I think I shared this with some of you at an earlier shiur before all of this happened. That I had personal experience with this. There was a time in my life I went through a crisis, something was very difficult for me, but because I forced myself to daven, even though it was hard, I didn't necessarily feel it, I was angry at God in those days, saying the words brought me back to, not even back, it brought me forward, because since then, my davening is different. When you let the words work on you and you begin to connect through these words, when I say it's a text written by someone else, it's not just anyone else. We're talking about a text written by the Chachamim using psukim from the Tanakh, the words of David HaMelech, people who knew what they were doing, people who knew how to express emunah. So when we say those words, they will impact us. So even if we're not in a place where I want to daven at this moment, okay, I have to daven. Say the words, and by the time we're finished, that ratzon is going to start emerging, and we're not going to be the same person we were when we started. We're going to be changed by our tefillah. It's like, ready or not, here I come. Like it or not, we will be changed by our tefillah. Okay, we are running out of time. There's a beautiful piece in Halekach veHalibov, which I love teaching this piece when I taught the Chatzotzrot, and source number 9, Rav Avaram Shor Shlita. He talks about the Chatzotzrot, and he cites the fact that the Rambam, even though if you look at the mitzvah of the Chatzotzrot in source number 3, it's 2 separate psukim. The first one talks about ki tavou milchama be'artzachem, davening be'et tzara, and the second pasuk says uv'yom simchatchem. Uv moadechem, uv roshei chodshechem. It's a Rosh Chodesh seminar, so we should mention Rosh Chodesh. On special days, on days of simcha, moadechem, meeting points in time with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, like Rosh Chodesh, we also blow the sound of the Chatzotzrot along with the Korbanot. So you would think you have here 2 separate mitzvot. At a time of tzara, we turn to Hashem when we blow the chatzotrot, and at a time of simcha, we turn to Hashem when we blow the chatzotrot. The Rambam says, no, it's one and the same mitzvah. Why is it one and the same mitzvah? It's two different things. Says halekach v'halibov, hein k'shehakadosh baruch hu oseh, based on a pasuk in Tehillim, because again, David HaMelech knew this very well. David HaMelech wrote, LeDavid Mizmor, chesed u'mishpat ashira lacha. Whether it's chesed, whether it's mishpat, ashira lacha. I turn to you, Hashem, with shira. And says, halakach v'halibov, we learn from here, the hin k'shehakadosh baruch hu oseh chesed, hin k'shehakadosh baruch hu oseh din u'mishpat, whether it's chesed, whether it's judgment, b'shneihem yesh lo midat hishtavut. There's a common denominator. Shneihem mivi'im oto lidei shira. They both bring us to the point of turning to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Ki yesod shneihem hu echad, v'hainu shira LaHaKadosh Baruch Hu, hein b'matzav shel simcha, hein b'matzav shel tzara. Why do they both bring us to shira? Because kol shinui, underlined lines at the end, kol shinui haba la'adam hu le'orero mishenato u'mihergel ha'chayim. Anything that changes from hergel, that from our habitual day-to-day, just, today, tomorrow, yesterday, it's all one and the same. When something happens that shakes us up, that's a hitorut from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's an inyan hitkarvut LaHaKadosh Baruch Hu. It wakes us up and causes us to draw close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that lifts us up. Shira, when we turn to Hashem, that in turn, like Rav Dessler said, lifts us up. There's a hitromimut hanefesh v'hitkarvut LaHaKadosh Baruch Hu, and brings us closer to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And of course, we daven that hitorut should come in a good way. But we have to find the good, even when there's so much going on that's bad. There's good. I was saying to somebody earlier, my daughter's 19 years old. And Baruch Hashem, she is in her second year of Shnat Shirut Leumi, and she unfortunately has lost 3 boys from her extended circle. So she's been to 3 funerals of boys that she knows, her age or a couple of years older. Today is the shloshim of one, Kfir Franco, Hashem Yikom Damo, and then she has 2 more, Binyamin Early, Hashem Yikom Damo, is coming up in the next couple of days, and Eitan Dishon, Hashem Yikom Damo. And the Dishon family, particularly, she's very close with, and she was at the Shiva every day. And she went into it very, very tzibrochen. The day that she found out, she was really, really broken. And I spent a lot of time with her and helped put her back together a little bit. And she went into the Shiva very broken. And at the end of the week, she came home and she said, "Mommy, I feel so uplifted." She said, "I am so blessed to be part of the Jewish people." She said, "You can't imagine what a special week it was. The family, the people who came, the Menachamim, people came from all over the country. When I was there, the whole Hanhala, the Rosh Yeshiva and the Rabbeim from Kiryat Shmona came. That's where he was learning in his Hesder Yeshiva. And they all came down from Kiryat Shmona under fire, came to pay a Shiva call to share with the family." She said, "There's no one like the Jewish people. We are so blessed to be part of this nation." And it was uplifting. So in the darkness, there are moments that are uplifting, but we should be zochet to better days. And I really wanted to end with this beautiful Torah from the Kedushat Levi, and it's a Torah from the Kedushot from Hanukkah. And I know we're leaving Hanukkah, but as we move forward in the year from Hanukkah, the month of Tevet is the darkest month of the year. But from Hanukkah on, the days get longer, and there's more light. We're bringing more light into the world. More light is accompanying us as we move forward from Tevet. And the Kedushat Levi in the first Kedusha for Hanukkah says, "Al yedei hanisim nikar le'ein kol sheholam hu mechudash." Nisim, the miracles like those that occurred on Hanukkah, help us realize, as we said before, that the world is constantly being renewed. HaKadosh Baruch Hu intervenes to change nature. And when a miracle happens, it sensitizes us to the fact that that's going on all the time. We spoke about that. This is Hashem, that's part of the aspect of tefillah, that we have to believe that Hashem is constantly changing the world. It becomes evident through the big miracles, right? The big miracles sensitize us to the smaller miracles. That's why it's called Chanukah, he says, because there's a hitchadshut, Chanukat Habayit. It's a new beginning. It's an inauguration that begins on Chanukah, a recognition of this idea that Hashem runs the world and intervenes miraculously. And then in the fifth Kedusha for Chanukah, he says there are three different types of miracles. One is a Nes Nigla, a Nes Galui, which is like the redemption from Mitzrayim with Eser Makot, Kriyat Yamsuf. That's the big wow. Nobody can ignore it. Nes Galui. And then there are Nisim Nistarim. There are hidden miracles. And hidden miracles can further be divided into two groups. One are the hidden miracles in which Hashem doesn't need human assistance at all. Human beings are manipulated to make it look like things are happening coincidentally, like in the Yosef story or in the Purim story. But really, it's all Hashkachat Hashem. And then there are Nisim Nistarim, hidden miracles, that require human effort as well. He says, that's like the Nes of Chanukah, where the Chashmonaim had to go out and fight their battles. And there had to be human effort and human cost. But it was still a hidden miracle. And says the Kedushat Levi so beautifully, Ma'alin Bakodesh, we have a principle, Ma'alin Bakodesh velo maridin. We only go up in matters of Kedusha. So as we move forward from Chanukah, we move forward from a time of the lowest kind of miracle, the Nes Nistar that requires human effort alongside it. Next comes Purim, where it's a Nes Nistar, the hand of Hashem is hidden, but it's all Hashem. It's all Hashem. We don't have to do anything. We just sit back and let it happen. We let ourselves be put in the right place at the right time. We're shlichim of HaKadosh Baruch Hu without even knowing it. We let him do the work. And ultimately that takes us to Pesach, in which we experience Nisim Gluyim, Be'ezrat Hashem. We should move forward on this trajectory. V'kar'eni b'yom tzara achal tzeka utachabdeni. As David HaMelech says in Sefer Tehillim, if we call out to Hashem, b'yom tzara, Hashem will save us. It should be, quickly we should see open and revealed miracles bringing us to the Geula Shlema and see the light without having to go through any more pain. So good to be back with you.